Good afternoon. My name is Don Maxwell, and today I will be talking to you about pivot tables, basic pivot tables, how to invoke your pivot table using Excel 2016. All right, so in order to use pivot tables, you must have data. So I'm going to open up an Excel spreadsheet with car sales data. All right, and the other thing to note when you do pivot tables is that you must understand the data, the original data that you have collected, right? So for example, here this is an auto dealership, all right, sales for sales quarter one, right? There are regions for the dealership and their branches. There are goals, sales goals, and there are actual goals that are written, and we have different departments as well, like service department, parts department, and actual sales and accessory. And we have a total of the goals and total of written sales. So again, let me iterate this. This is very important that we do understand the data that you've collected. That's how you're going to be able to ask questions of the data. So pivot tables are designed so that you can ask questions of your data. For example, if I wanted to know all the goals, sales goals within a certain region, within branches, I can filter that subset of data, creating a separate report. So let's go see how that works. The first thing to do is to go to your Insert Pivot Table, and that will invoke your pivot table window, right? And here you'll see that you have choices, right? Two major choices. I can select the data from my table, or I can select the data range from the existing information that I have. In addition to that, if I want to use external source, another table from a different database, I can do that as well, right? Then I have to choose where I want to actually place my reports, all right? So in this case, I'm going to be putting them on a new sheet. If I had existing sheets, they would be down here. So I'm going to put it on a new sheet as well. Okay. Now we're going to use the external data source for a different class. All right. So let's ensure that we have selected the data that we need. So I'm going to click on the collapse button, and then you can see the collapse button allows you to see the animation around your data. See the animation line? If you go to the outer peripheral of the data, you can see an animation around the data. Well, that is this formula that you see here. Sales sheet quarter one and the range, right? And notice it's using absolute values. That's the $ in front of the cell names, okay? All right. So let's go back and let's select. Okay, now I've invoked my pivot table. I can see that I have the pivot table tools in form of a contextual tab right at the top here, right? And notice I have two sets of tools. I can analyze or I can show designs. So I can further do designs of my pivot table, or I can analyze, right? As I said, we're going to be looking at analyzing, and remember the questions. We're going to be looking at our sales within region and within offices as well, office location. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is to look at my pivot table fields, right? This is a tool. This is a template on the right that actually shows your tools. You can show how the fields that you want, what size you want of the tool. I can actually select different format for the tool. As you see, I'm clicking here and I'm selecting the different formats, right? What do I want to show as far as my tool is concerned, right? And what size. So let's go back and we're going to field selection and area selection stack. That's what I like to work with because I have my full set of tools in front of me. In addition to looking at my tools, now I have to pick the data that I want to show on my pivot chart. And I do that by selecting the data fields, the field names. For example, here's region. Do I need region? Yes, I do need region because I'm going to be filtering on region. Do I need branches? Branch office? Yes, I do need branch office because I can filter within branch office. Remember, each region have a set of branch offices, so I must know for sure what branch offices are related to what region. All right, next, I just want to look at just the goals. So I'm going to pick sales goal, service goals, part goals, accessory goals, and I also could pick the total sales goal. Right? Now, notice as I pick my data, my chart is not formulated yet, right? I'm simply picking the data, so it's showing me the same set of data that I had on my spreadsheet. So now I want to further filter the information that makes a lot more sense and answer the questions that I want. So I'm going to take region and I'm going to put it under the filter. Why? Because I'll be filtering on region. For example, this is a separate field here, region. And notice it says all, that's showing all my current regions. So for example, if I want to show North Central region and click OK, notice it will just show me the North Central region. The other tool that you should note here is if you are unable to see your data after you go and filter it, go to the analyzer and go to your data source and refresh your data. Sometimes what will happen is the data is not refreshed fast enough, so it looks like your data is not appearing on your sheet. So don't forget that tool, right? Analyze, data, refresh. There. All right, so what we're looking at here is the data for the goals, but notice what the pivot table did. It put sum in front of the field names, right? So if you do look at the bottom of your quadrant, you would see values, right? So that area is where it's actually changing those fields to allow summary of each field. Now, in addition to that, each field are summed using the sum function, right? We're simply adding. Again, if you wanted different formulas or different functions, notice there's a down arrow next to each field. If I click on that, I can simply go to a field value settings. Field value settings, right? And take note of this menu that you see here. I can move up and down fields. I could move fields to a filter report. I could have those choices. But today we're going to be looking at the field values. So let's go ahead and click on field values. What does the field value give me? Well, first it gives me the option of selecting the function that I want to do with my data. If I want to sum my data or an average, or I want to look for the maximum or minimum, right? And again, this class is based on pivot table. You would look to another class to understand functions, right? All right. So for now, the sum function adds the numbers within a set of a row of numbers. Okay, so let's do OK here. The other thing that you can do is where you see the row labels that was created, you can go in and change any label you want. So for example, this row label here, right? You remember what that was? If you don't remember, we can always go back to the report, the sales report, and look for what that label was. It was branch office, right? See, branch office. So if I go back to the sheet, I can call this branch office. Right? And note, I can go to any one of these headers and change them, right? I really don't want to change these. They still represent my sales. Just happen to have some off on them, but if you wanted to put them back to sales goal and so on, all you have to do is click on the fields and change the name back, right? That's fine. Right? So what did this give you? What did my pivot table give you? It gave me a new field called grand total, which tallies each of my services or each of my parts in a row, right? So just tally that. So my grand total is. So here, again, if I wanted to filter on region, right, I can go back to my sales quarter and I can see within the Southeast region, I have Boca, Lakeland, Miami, and so on, right? So that's what I would need on my sheet here. So if I go to the Northeast, right? Northeast is going to give me Philadelphia. So let's go back and look at all my Northeast region. They're all Philly, right? So if I want to further filter to see, for example, Philly, what is Philadelphia's number? I could go and select just the Philadelphia's number, right? And this is what it's all about, folks. It's simply being able to look at the data in different ways to analyze it so it makes business sense. Right? So let's go back and look at North Central. Now, what branches belong to North Central? Boston, Boston South, and so on. Boston. So if we wanted to further filter on Boston, you can pick Boston. You'll see that the data appear. And then you can continuously ask questions of the database that way. Whatever question that you need to know for your business, by filtering it, it gives you an advantage because you can print a report and you can view and you can analyze that data separately. The other thing that I would like to do here is to show you how you can quickly invoke a chart. Again, having your data is one thing, but creating a chart is very impressive, especially if you're going to be showing this data to clients, right? So let's go ahead and look at one of our popular regions. Let's go back and say, okay, let's look at our Southeast region, right, which includes Boca, Lakeland, Miami, and Orlando. So let's say we wanted to look at the Southeast region, and we want to look at Orlando, right? Miami, right? So we can look at the data. But again, if you want to create a chart of each one of these reports, it's very simple, right? How do you do it? Well, we have to go to the analyzer, and you will see pivot chart. See that? So if I click on pivot chart, right away it gives me a choice of different charts, right? For in this case, a column chart would make more sense, right? And again, we do have a separate class on charts. I just want to show you how pivot chart work with your pivot table. So in this sense, I'm going to be picking a 3D clustered column chart, or something that is stacked, or 3D. Pick one of them. Okay, this is fine. All right, let's pick this one. All right, and once we pick our chart and we say okay, now note the chart appears with your pivot table. You can further use your chart to do your filtering. So for example, I could still click on the chart. Notice there's a filter field here. I could click on the chart and change what region I want to filter the same way, right? So I could treat the chart the same way I treat the report. But again, the chart, of course, looks a lot more presentable than the data, right? Now, what if I want to put my chart on a different sheet? I can do that as well, right? So I can put the chart on, let's say, sheet 2. So let's go ahead and add sheet 2, right? And I'm going to be putting my chart on sheet 2. So I'm going to click on chart, right? And again, when I'm in chart, if I go to design, location, I can click on move chart. I could put the chart as an object in the sheet. Why? Because I have additional advantages into manipulating this chart as an Excel spreadsheet. So I'm going to be selecting the sheet number 2. I'm going to say OK, and there's my chart and sheet number 2. Here's the trick. If I go and make changes here, look what's going to happen to my chart. Now, this is the southeast, right? How about southwest? And I'm just not going to filter on branches. I'm going to show all the branches within the southwest. Look what happens to the chart. That's the key advantage. Whatever I do to my data, I don't have to redo it to the chart. It will automatically update my chart, right? And here's the thing, folks. If you go back to sales sheet and you change any data on the sales sheet, you don't have to come back and recreate your pivot table. That will automatically be updated in your pivot table. So I can manipulate my data from one place, which is my database. If I go in and change any number, like this is southeast, and I'm going to just change this to 991. 991, right? That's Boca Raton. Now, if I go back to my sheet and Boca Raton, let's go ahead and update the data. Again, remember that if your data is not updated right away, you just have to refresh it, right? There you go. Right? So don't forget to refresh your data. If you look at your chart, don't panic. If your data is not updated, you just simply go and refresh, and there is 991. So I did all my update from my original chart, and all my pivot tables will be updated. Another thing is, what if I want to create different pivot tables, or I want to create different sheets for different regions? All right, I'm simply going to add one other region here. So I'm going to say plus and sheet 3. So let's say sheet 3, I simply want to add this report to sheet 3 and change the information. All right, I can go to sheet 1. By the way, let's name that to southeast. Right? Now, what if I want data for southwest or southwest? If I wanted data for southwest to be placed onto sheet 3, right? I could simply go to sheet 3. All right, so I simply want to copy a sheet. I simply go to the report, right? Right click on it and go to move or copy. And I'm going to be copying it to sheet 3. So I click on sheet 3 and make sure you check this box here because it says copy, right? Create a copy, right? Otherwise it will not create a copy. I say okay. So when I go to the sheet 2, I will see that it has the report on it. Now, of course, it's east, so we want southwest, right? So we're going to rename this southwest. Right? And now I can filter for my southwest. So I can have different filter. I can have my southeast filter here. right? And I can have my Southwest filter here, right? Creating two separate reports. In addition to that, what if I wanted to create the same report on the same sheet, right? Well, I could simply copy paste the information into another location on the sheet, right? Now I can change this to another location. So I can have multiple reports on the same page as well. Well, I recommend that you put different reports on different sheets, because when you go to print, if you were printing this report, you go File, Print, you have the option of printing your report either on one sheet, or you can print your report as a book. See when it says entire book? If I say the entire book, you'll see that now I have 8 different pages, right, that I'm looking at that I can print the entire book from, right? So I have the choice of putting them on separate sheets or putting the same report, different filters on the same sheet, right? Any questions? Okay, good job, guys. This was just an introduction to pivot tables. We'll do more advanced functionality in a different class. Good night, and I'll see you in another class.